And now I'd like to introduce Mr. Peter Zamora, who is Regional Counsel for the Mexican American Legal Defense and Educational Fund.
Morning, everyone. MALDEF, the Mexican American Legal Defense and Educational Fund, we are the nation's leading Latino civil rights legal organization, basically the law firm for the Latino community. I think Wade did a tremendous job of describing the gains and the ways in which the education reform stalled in the 20th century. And I think that there was a tendency on the part of MALDEF and many advocates to look to the federal courts for relief in the 20th century. And, certainly MALDEF in our 40-year history has participated in much high-impact litigation that has secured important gains for Latino students. But what we've seen generally is a federal judiciary that's less willing these days to deliver expansive interpretations of the Constitution and to deliver for poor and minority children. I think this started in 1973 with the San Antonio versus Rodriguez case, found there was no constitutional right to an education. And, obviously just this past summer we had a case from the Supreme Court dealing with voluntary integration plans at the local level. So we've seen really a fairly consistent rollback. And as such, MALDEF has focused upon the federal legislative process more so than we have in the past, because we feel that federal education reform is as promising, and we still continue to litigate on behalf of Latino students, but that there is more reform happening here in Congress than there is happening through the courts, and that's a radical shift. I am going to talk some about the gains that we have made as well as the limitations of the current Elementary and Secondary Education Act, the No Child Left Behind Act. There's been much discussion of what No Child Left Behind hasn't done. Much of it focused upon the fact that No Child Left Behind has not remedied our nation's history of inequities in education. In the first 5 years of this sort of renewed focus on minority achievement, we have not gotten to the promised land by a long shot. Much of that has been because of resistance to the law, that anytime you have such a radical change from the federal level, there's going to be resistance. Much of that has also been because of limited funding. Certainly, there's some truth to the allegations that No Child Left Behind has elements of an unfunded mandate. It does intend to go into every classroom to fundamentally change the way we think about American public education, and the dollars haven't flowed. But part of what we're trying to do here is focus upon the fact that this is a fundamental civil rights law. The core principles of this law are principles of our organizations that we've been advocating for many years. The principle that all children can learn. These should not be radical principles, and I think many folks would agree and pay lip service to this idea. But this is really implementing the idea that all children can learn and that no school is successful unless every student in that school has an adequate opportunity to learn. And thirdly, that there's a federal role in defining education, but that there should be local flexibility in implementing it. So there has been some tension in the first 5 years, resistance and hostility and much gaming of the system, but I'm going to focus here upon what has worked. And I think that the key areas there are going to be in transparency and in teacher quality. And really those are, you hear a lot about sanctions and about the draconian nature of the law. Now, there have not been mass school closings and there have not been mass layoffs based out of No Child Left Behind. Clearly there's a graduated series of consequences, many of which are based in the best research, but we haven't seen the apocalyptic nature that you would hear that there are mass layoffs and teachers on bread lines. I'm a former teacher myself and am able to sort of speak from that perspective, and I'll address that a little bit more as we move forward. But first, in the area of transparency, the assessment and the reporting, really more so than the sanctions, is where the most radical changes have emerged. Our organizations, every organization that's part of the campaign, has been advocating for years, and we've been describing the poor outcomes, the poor opportunities that our student populations face. Now, for the first time, we have data from every U.S. school we can point to. And we can say, it's not this nebulous ask that, our students aren't doing well. We can actually point to particular subgroups in particular schools and use the data generated here. And there are several very important uses for that. First is you read about educational inequality on the front page of national and local newspapers. That never happened prior to No Child Left Behind. When test results are reported, it's a big story locally. And what we've seen is that organizations have been able to organize around this data to take back local schools. And there are many successful stories about advocates who have used the data and have gone, a National Council of La Raza works frequently with a parent group in Oregon that has been very successful in sort of using the mandates of No Child Left Behind as well as the data that it provides. And they've gone in and they've gotten staff that have been more effective in teaching the Latino student population there. They've been able to secure curricular changes for English language learners. And so you hear much about this sort of faceless federal program, but in fact what it contemplates is a local revolution in every school district, in every school attendance area, where we're providing the tools for people to take back their schools. Also, to the extent that there is far-reaching, useful litigation that's happening right now in U.S. courts. It's happening in state courts under the rubric of adequacy litigation, where, since we don't have a constitutional guarantee in the federal constitution, nearly every state does have a guarantee of education, of an adequate education in the state constitution. But prior to No Child Left Behind, there was no definition of, well, what's an adequate education? And lawyers were forced to jump through hoops to try to define that. Well, now, under No Child Left Behind, we have a set of state standards, and then we have the reporting. And so we now have a much better sense of what an adequate education means and what opportunity to achieve that means. And so it's provided material for lawyers who are continuing to work in state courts to secure adequacy.